Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Ryan Estes here, and he is a Buddhist entrepreneur. And we're going to talk about a lot of things, maybe podcasting, maybe Buddhism, maybe a whole bunch of other stuff. Welcome to the show.
Really appreciate it, Stewart. Happy to be here.
Oh man, there's so many ways we could go. What's the most interesting thing you've learned podcasting or being on podcasts?
Most interesting thing from podcasting, I think I learned that conversation is probably humans' most primary instinct. I think that conversation brings people together, in particularly in this culture where you have so many things that are divisive, especially digitally, especially communication wise. If you're looking at social media or you're looking at emails, a lot is missed in context that podcasts give you. Now we're doing video, but even when it was audio only, inflection in the voice and intention made a big difference.
And there's just there's so much there in terms of how old it is too. I've been thinking a lot about the 400 BC and when Socrates and all these guys were getting around and they were just doing their symposiums and all hanging out. And somebody invented writing around the time, and Socrates was like, "No, I don't want to do any of that. That's going to ruin our memories. This is the real thing. This is going to be speaking with each other. That's what it's all about." And then he never wrote anything down. And then Plato wrote everything about Socrates. And I think he's right. And then, to just leap really far to where we are now, the AI thing, it feels like it's actually going to make voice communication more prevalent. Because now I've got friends who are, just speaking to the AI and they think it's more efficient and everything like that. But what do you think about that? The difference between writing something and speaking to it?
Well, I think it's interesting if you're thinking about the origin of consciousness. I think there's some evidence that language actually birthed kind of our sentient consciousness. There's a great argument made by Janes. It's called The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, which is just a fantastic title. And such a fun book. I don't know if you can prove any of this stuff, but anecdotally, it's really interesting. So what it shows is through interestingly enough, all the written text we have that's most ancient, which are either religious scriptures or you have the Iliad. You have very, very, very old stories that were orally passed down before they are written down. But his intuition and what he shows is not only the origin of consciousness, but also the origin of religion, where you have in primitive humans that are biologically exactly the same as us, but they're not communicating. But when you have larger cultures and tribes that start coming together, their grunts and their hand gestures become a little bit more sophisticated. Maybe they have 25 words, then they have 150 words, and then they have 600 words, And through that process, what they speculate is that the barrier between the right and left lobe in the brain started to be penetrating. It started communicating across lobes, which we do all the time. But the primitive version of that would be commands. It would be what we would call schizophrenia, hearing voices. And so the attributes of early religion would be they worshiped little idols. We can dig them up and we see their little gods. And it's not like this is a representation of an idea of a god. If you think of a crucifix or a little Buddha that people have, nobody thinks that that's Jesus. They're no, this is just a symbol of Jesus. But in primitive societies, it was no, that is the God. And he tells me to do things. And he tells me all kinds of different, the angel and the devil on the shoulder. I've experienced this my whole life in a weird way where if I'm really relaxed, I'm kind of dozing off to sleep. I'll get auditory hallucinations where I'll hear my name. I'll just hear out of the corner of my ear, Ryan. I'm like, what the hell? I think somebody's there. So it could be that language and consciousness are intricately connected. So right now we're entering a new era with AI where we're going to be able to communicate in radically new ways. There's a great field of science called cognitive ergonomics. And this is largely of how can we interact with technology to
Ooh.
trigger different things. With AI, we can do all kinds of stuff. We can flutter our eye and dim the lights. We could, move our ears and turn the car on. We can program all this stuff very easily. So we're going to have this whole new nuanced way to communicate not only with each other, but with technology. And I wonder if it's going to bridge a new kind of consciousness, in the same way that the bicameral mind breakdown did.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. I like this. So it reminds me of a podcast I just recently did with the Polypals, and the Polypals. We did a totally masked interview because we brought the whole team on, and they all 3D printed their masks. About two of them were doing it for anonymous reasons to stay anonymous, but the other ones were just playing around. But they're building this crazy thing, which is I don't understand it quite. They're trying to do a way of proof of liveness where we could be having this video call and through some sort of proof of light mechanism could basically prove that both of us are not creating fictional live synchronous video calls via deepfakes. And so where did I go? Oh yes, they're gonna start creating things like what you talked about with these statues that no, but not statues. It'll be completely projections because the way they do it is they project on. They'll have a projector on my side and a projector on your side, and then they'll basically project and then see whether it's been falsified or not through something I don't understand in what I just explained. Um, and so he's talking about creating like projections that go around and speak to you and it just feels like it's going to get so weird and it sounds like you've been thinking along these lines as well. I think there's like a challenge there, particularly against scientism and this idea that we have, or this sort of ideology that's come up in the last 100 years or so about science as a belief system rather than science as a method of inquiry. Um, and I think it's going to be really challenging for a lot of people to go through this. Um, but also it's going to, like, it might bring us back to some sort of more ancient feeling. Anything you want to add there? Anything you were thinking about like where we're headed and how it might affect our psychology?
Yeah, I try and stay optimistic, but I think
Mm.
the intuition is to be scared as hell, you
Yeah.
know? Talking about like Socrates and Plato, his analogy of the shadows on
Mm.
the cave wall,
Mm.
and the Buddhism has a very similar thing of,
Mm.
revealing the truth that what you're looking at are the shadows dancing on the wall, but what you need to do is realize that it's being cast by what is actually real, not to say that that's not.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, and I love that analogy too, because Carl Sagan has this great video about multi-dimensions. So, so it's a great metaphor, largely because 2 dimensions is the shadow of 3 dimensions,
Cool.
So, but 3 dimensions then is the shadow of, I think, the fifth or fourth dimension. I don't totally understand it. It's a little bit different because we live 3 dimensionally, but we also live as a product of time. So there's 4 dimensions. So we live in 4 dimensions, which is the shadow of the fifth dimension.
Yeah, interesting.
And
Yeah,
I
what
don't
is
know
the
if you've
fifth
ever
dimension?
seen if you've ever seen the shadow of the fifth dimension. It's the tesseract,
Oh
you
wow.
know.
Wait.
So
Is that a movie or is that just you're talking about like what a visualization of the fifth dimension looks like?
it's a visual representation of the shadow
Yeah,
of the
okay.
fifth dimension,
Of the shadow of
because
the
we have no way to perceive it. It'd be like if we are 2 dimensional beings and the third dimension passed through us like a pencil through a paper, it would just look like a circle to a 2 dimensional being,
God.
but it's
Wow.
actually a pencil. You have no idea how to see it. So
Yeah,
as a four
interesting.
dimensional being, we have no idea how to perceive a fifth dimension.
Mm.
So a part of me feels like we're kind of playing with some of this stuff now.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of
Mm.
playing with perhaps ways that we can use hyper intelligence to to reveal some of this information that is visualize it in some way, to grok it in some way,
Yeah.
to experience it in some way. Which there's other ways to do that as well. But I think maybe that's a part of this. You know, maybe a prompt will be like, "Hey, GPT, give me a visual representation with oranges of what the fifth dimension could be," or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting, and it's been fitting with my prompting experience lately, where I've got a specific style on Claude that asks it to give me cerebral depth on whatever question I want. And my friend gave me the style, and it's like a prompt that kind of changes the output of it. And one of the funniest things I've noticed is that I get into an overwhelm. Like there's a period of overwhelm where it's trying to teach me something, but it's beyond my pay grade. And so I'm sure you get into it. I'm sure many of the listeners get into it, where it's just like you're asking this omni intelligence that knows more about a lot of things, but is also subtly wrong in very fun ways, hallucinatory ways, and everything like that. And so I'm confronted by this mountain of information, some of which I can't understand, and it's too much information. Which there's a sidetrack there about autistic people who overshare, who do that as well. Humans often do that too. There's this like challenge that it brings of giving me too much of something, and that challenge is like what you're talking about. And it reminds me of the subconscious versus the unconscious. The subconscious is what we can make conscious, right? It's like we have the ability to turn the subconscious into conscious, I think. Unconscious is not within the realm of something that can be made conscious, I think. Again, these are all questions. I don't really know the answers to that. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think we're definitely going to be able to use our subconscious to trigger
Interesting.
AI events. And it might just take some practice, but we use our subconscious all the time, you know. We're just not conscious of it. So
Yeah,
what
yeah.
does that look like? You know, maybe that does look like making the world more palatable to my taste as I move through it.
Oh,
You know,
interesting.
maybe it's like filtering the art decor the way that I want to. Maybe it's making the sensation of the floor on my feet feel the way I want it to. You know, I mean, we're going to be able to like kind of hack like a
Yeah.
lot of our neurology and our sensations with AI in some capacity. I mean, primitive now, but we can do it already. You put AirPods inside your ears and you're like, oh, it sounds better. You know, who's to say that neural implant doesn't, you know, go in there that, you know, one of my wife's yelling at me, it just turns it down just a little bit, you know, because it subconsciously knows that if the volume gets too loud, that's irritating me. That was mean. My wife is lovely. She would never do that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
let's
yeah,
say like a fire
yeah.
truck passes me. Like I am very sensitive to noise. And so like that loud noise gives me displeasure. So let's say we could use some kind of subconscious cues, which is like, oh, blood pressure, heart rate, auditory is spiking. Turn it down just a little bit.
Mm.
So this is, I mean, kind of Black Mirror territory, but also fully within the realm of possibility. And I do like to look at it optimistically. Like, how can we make this a more beautiful place for everybody? Perhaps subsequently unlocking some kind of new form of consciousness and communication that we don't even understand tangibly.
Mm. And from what I've read, they are doing it. The LLMs are creating new languages and stuff, and then there's the languages we'll create in order to speak with them more efficiently. I really like what you just said about particularly the optimistic thing. I think in order to have that optimistic future, it does feel personally to me that we'll need to own the entire stack of our computation stack. So starting from the operating system, the kernel, and like really own the software that we interact with, which one engineer told me means that we effectively own the hardware as well, because if we own the software, that means that we can kind of program the hardware to do whatever we want. Um, and that feels like that feels because the Black Mirror stuff feels like if another third party is in control, particularly like someone like Musk. I don't think I would trust someone like Musk having a neural link in my head, like in the same way Starlink kind of like it's like, okay, Starlink seems great as a secondary to our terrestrial internet, but at the same time it's like Oh, he's got a lot of power now over a really important thing. What do you think about this question of owning the software, owning the hardware? Have you started to vibe code? Are you getting into this at all?
Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty deep into it.
Mm.
I think you're right, and I think you see the pain points in these oligarchs and what where they're positioning themselves. Because let's look at Apple for example.
Yeah,
Their AI sucks. It's
yeah,
awful, but that's because they valued privacy so much, which
yeah,
I really appreciate with their
yeah.
hardware. They're not taking data, so they don't have data. You know,
Mhm.
um, Sam Altman. Sam Altman doesn't have data or hardware, so he launches this whole new startup with Johnny Ives, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna make something," and so it's gonna be a puck, or it's gonna be a wearable, or it's gonna be glasses, because they need data. They can get boxed out and not have any training data, at least in this country, because we still value IP. And they've already kind of consumed everything, so they need more, but they don't have a way to get it. So they're
Like
launching
X.
a hardware.
Yep.
They have the software, they don't have the hardware. Then you look at Google. Now Google is in a position where they have the
Everything.
hardware and the data, you know. And Gemini early on kind of lost its foothold to GPT because of the hype cycle, and also because Gemini made some terrible mistakes in the beginning. The hallucinations were awful, and so people kind of bounced. But my bet is that Google is going to run with this because they have
Mm.
everything.
Mm. Okay, that and what so really good points, and I agree that Google is now coming back from the grave to essentially they just have so many all of the compute, and they have billions of dollars, and they have tons of data, and I guess they have the Pixel too, so they do have hardware.
They have hardware,
Yeah,
yeah.
so they have everything. That's
They've got
interesting.
everything, and so
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like
Mm.
we're gonna have to switch ownership to the hardware, which is great
Mm.
because this technology is gonna and basically is leading to limitless free energy is the endpoint, which
Mm.
gives us limitless free hardware.
Interesting.
You know, and then we have owning the data, which ultimately we can lease for our own profit. It's not fair that Oracle's a
Yeah,
trillion
that,
dollar company when I should be able to be in charge and sell the data that I want, because honestly I do want people to have data. I want my Apple Watch to know my pheromone level or whatever,
mm.
but I want to be able to give that to them at where I'm profiting. So I think the ownership of the hardware software is an inevitable conclusion, and perhaps is like this like kind of a universal basic income that everybody's looking at will kind of come down to that. Again, Black Mirror territory. I don't know if you saw the
Mhm.
new season, but
No,
the first episode was all about that.
about universal basic income.
No, it was about the well,
Mm.
this poor woman had some kind of medical procedure she needed, um, but she couldn't afford the upgrade. So then she would start
Mm.
saying advertisements like every two
Yeah, yeah. Oh, got it,
hours.
got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's the
So
Neuralink connection. Like if it's
yeah,
Neuralink, you're
yeah, kind of.
yeah, yeah. Um,
s-
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like this world where essentially you run out of your loans. I've been reading this great book called The Ascent of Money, and it's going into how money got wrapped up into our economy. And so I'm learning about 2008. I'd already known a little bit of the subprime mortgage crisis and what led that, but this book just goes into the whole history of money. And what you just said about that Black Mirror is really interesting because I think that crypto is going to play a really important role in kind of bringing back insurance, bringing back all these things that the state has sort of entered into and created regulated monopolies into. And I think it's all going to like fractalize. And I definitely see a Black Mirror type of situation where that sort of those trends go wrong. But I'm like you, I like to be an optimist as well. And I think there's so much to be optimistic about right now, a lot more than a year ago. AI seems really interesting because AI seems like it is going to change the balance of power among big tech companies. George Hotz did an interview with the Technology Brothers podcast, I think, and I just saw a clip. He thinks it's going to look like the big tech of 2000 to 2020. but I don't think he's right. And his whole argument was based on the servers because people like him are using LLMs at rapid pace, the $200 a month. But like that level of intelligence, I don't think is a mainstream type of thing. I think it's for nerds. And we aren't going to need large servers and we aren't going to need a lot of things. Actually, here's a great question for you. Do you think it's going to be a more local future in terms of our language models, or do you think it's going to be a cloud-based future or some combination of both?
Hmm. The actual storage.
Yeah, and
I,
the way you
I
interact with it. Are we going to own the models, do you think?
I don't know. I hope
Yeah.
so. I mean,
Yeah.
Apple's kind of banking on that, but again, like, Siri's terrible.
Yeah.
To keep it contained inside the machine and to own it
Interesting.
personally has great privacy advantages, but you lose a lot of the compute. It
Mm,
it might take some time in order to have, you know, those, I mean, those NVIDIA chips are the size of this room, right? It's funny because they say chips and you look at them, you're like, God dang, those
that's a
things are
couch.
humongous, So yeah, I'm not sure. I think the way that, the technology oligarchs, that word's on the
Mm,
tip of my tongue, and I know it's
yeah.
kind of derogatory. I don't feel that way
I think
necessarily.
it's right. I
I
think
I
that's where we
trust
are.
that they're I
Yeah.
trust that they're capitalists, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
Interesting.
but I think the point is that it's derogatory maybe for a reason, because there's definitely a cynicism from the kind of tech
Mm,
world about users of the
yeah.
technology and the way that they treat customers, which is not like your local diner that's like, hey honey, how are you, we remember
Yeah.
what you want, we're going to take care of you. It's like, no, you can never talk to a person, you're stuck
Yep.
in this phone tree. Like
Yep.
they have a cynicism of seeing us like kind of sheep that need to be managed, which
Yeah.
is alarming.
Yeah.
um
100%. And that was all in 2010. Like that was I mean, Facebook was the real one. Like, and it's incontrovertible, what they did in with the users. Like, there's just tons of data on the way Zuckerberg looks at the people who use their software, from his own
yeah.
mouth, like including when he was younger, but also he was paying off VPNs in order to, harvest user data. So clearly, like, there's not a huge moral value on, protecting the users. And as you accurately presented, the Facebook essentially they, removed the human in the loop totally from all of their products. And then the 2016 election came in and, forced the government to go in and tell them to put some humans back inside of it, and then created a horrible role of the humans who had to go through all of the content that humans create. Um, so the oligarchs is a really interesting point. I think we're entering into a world of, essentially, digital warlords, because they are essentially gaining more power vis-a-vis the nation state than they used to have, except in times like the East Indies Company and other times like that. Um, so, but I also think that technology itself is going to come in and, in the more optimistic take, offer us avenues out of these essentially structures that are being built right now. What do you think?
I think you're 100% right. And I was talking to a buddy of mine, Andrew. He had a really interesting idea. We were talking about how, Apple Vision Pro was just such a flop. And he said it was just the wrong price point. He said, and he was
Mm,
really glad. He said, basically, what's going to happen is the goggles will come and they will be amazing.
yeah.
And they'll be cheap. And what you're going to do is you're going to lose the poverty classes to the glasses forever. Because why would you want to live in your world when you can just put on your goggles, drink your milkshake, and just that's a wrap?
Yeah.
In my
The Brave
experience
New
with
World.
with VR is that, like, it's very smooth going into it. You put them on, you kind of adjust to, like, oh, there's a screen, but your body accepts it. But it's kind of jarring taking them off, especially when you had them
Mm.
on for an hour. You're like, oh, ugh. The world sucks, So his idea is that, like, VR, and especially what they're trying to make, is like kind of undemocratic because it's scratching the itch of something very fundamental.
Mm,
and to technology companies, it feels a little predatory. I mean, I personally am always a little bit skeptical of something that's too pretty because I'm a fisherman. And if I got a new pattern, I'm putting it on the end of the line, best believe there's a hook on that.
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah,
know?
yeah.
So I always think if the aliens kind of were hunting for humans, did you see like a cheeseburger appear in the middle of the room? Be like, definitely don't eat that. you know.
Yeah.
But the point is, I think that like the pattern and the bait of VR and a completely enveloped AI created to your spec world is so attractive and tantalizing that we're going to lose a lot of people to that
Mm,
illusion, which kind of you
mm,
can pull out and say, we've already done that. And perhaps that's exactly what this life is. And that's what, the Buddhists and Hindus have been speculating for a long, long time.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
don't know, maybe we're in some kind of like perpetual fractal that just replaces itself over and over again on each node every chance it gets, because that's just what fractals do.
yeah. I really like where that went. Okay, so because that's and it shows up in Plato too. The one of the biggest things I've been trying to figure out is the Gnosticism, because you have Gnosticism in the second AD. Plato kind of starts the Gnosticism. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff going in there. I don't mean to overgeneralize, but the West has a long tradition of Gnosticism, and the East also has it with Advaita Vedanta, and there is some sort of interplay between Buddhism and Hinduism, Advaita Vedanta, where on the nature of God, and Buddhism kind of rejected it, said no self, and the Hindus said there is a self, but it's with a capital S. But all this stuff, like all of them, seem to agree that the nature of our world is not what it appears to be, and that we're here to learn something. And they all have kind of different takes on it. But all three pretty, integrous religious structures all kind of agree on these points that reality as we see it is illusory. And it's going to be really interesting, the scenario we've been talking about in terms of how confronted we're going to be with the illusory state of the things that we create, which also kind of backs it up into that illusory state of how it is right now.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it's kind of like an opportunity. It's a really weird opportunity, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the Gnostics, the thing that's
Mm.
been rid or lost from their tradition is just
Mm.
the entheogenic medicines they were doing to drive the points home.
Mm.
You you read the Gnostic Gospels, you read it from any culture, and you're like, dude, what? This sounds
Yeah.
like a bunch of gobbledygook. Like you
Yeah.
just try to confuse me with your mouth. But if you imbibe in certain entheogens, like you're like, oh, this makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not that like this is an illusion. It's just yes and. It's like, oh yes, this, but
Ooh,
also
I like
there's
that.
this other thing that you can actually experience in different ways, and it provides that secret, the secrets of the universe in some capacity.
Mm. I've been
You
reading this
know,
great book by Frances Yates, who's a historian of the occult, and she wrote two books
cool.
on the first one is by this Italian Sicilian guy who was a Dominican, and he found this book from the second century. They all thought it was actually from the time of Moses, but it was from the second century by a Neoplatonist, all about Neoplatonic magic.
Cool.
And so it starts in the late 1400s. This is where they rediscovered. They were all aware of the Romans. The Romans never left our Western understanding, but they did rediscover the Greeks. And when they rediscovered the Greeks, they also rediscovered Neoplatonic magic. And at the time, the medieval thing was like, okay, there's the universe out there, but that's all the devil's world. And so we've got God, and we're going to try to devote ourselves in faith, and we don't want money, we don't want any worldly power or anything like that. And so we're just going to not pay attention to the world. And then all of a sudden, with this rediscovery of the Greek tradition, particularly magic, it was like, oh, we can practically change the world. And so they challenged the church on a lot of points, sometimes subtly and sometimes not. And so this Giordano Bruno went to Oxford, and he started telling everybody about the Neoplatonic magic, and then the Catholics killed him because
Yeah.
they were like you can't do that, like can't do magic. And so But that's the science. Like that was the Copernicus actually in his treatise on the universe, the mathematics of the universe. He actually goes and says, he quotes Hermegesis Trismegistus, who's this a compilation of authors from the second century AD, who they mistakenly thought was from Moses, but was actually a Neoplatonist. A lot of different authors together, and so Copernicus actually cited this guy and was like, here's all my mathematics, and this is the worldview I have, and it's basically descended from Neoplatonic magic. And that's like the science tradition from the 1500s and the 1700s. And then you get Isaac Newton with alchemy later on. And then I was just researching that too. After Isaac Newton, a few more people tried to mess around with alchemy until one guy said that he converted lead into gold. And then when they pushed him on the early peer review on it, he's like, nope. He drank poison in order to get out of giving them the peer review on it. So, and that was the final straw for alchemy, basically. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Pythagoras was a fantastic cult leader. I mean, everything they've got on that guy is incredible. He was definitely like kind of an ascended being. And,
Yeah.
you think about how lucky we are in this time that we can have conversations like that, because that whole like shaman class in every culture ends up getting wiped out and killed by the powers that be. I mean, they killed Jesus, they killed Socrates. Like they don't like people helping other people expand their mind and live outside of the dominating paradigm. Like it's always been in conflict with every power system, But we have this great opportunity now as long as we've got it, we have the freedom of speech to have these conversations publicly and not have too much risk of like being burned at the stake or something horrific like that. But certainly that was exactly what happened and why we lost so much information. I was reading about the libraries of the Mayans and the Aztecs that were lost from Cortez, and we're talking, I mean, I think the Mayan codexes, there's like 4 left.
Oh, interesting.
But and these are like paper scrolls, the Mesoamericans were unbelievably advanced, unbelievable. Well, the library of the Mayans was 250,000 scrolls, and they burned it. They burned it all because they wanted the gold. It's like, dude.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Lost knowledge. It's really annoying
Yeah.
how we lose it. And with AI, this is one of my obsessions about how to not lose knowledge. Because that's what a dark age, I believe, is that when we lose knowledge either through inattention or we actually physically lose it because Cortez comes in and burns all the scrolls.
Well, what else contributed to the Dark Ages was the plague.
Yeah.
So the church used to be the place where the academics. So the smartest guy in your neighborhood was a priest, and the smartest priest was the bishop, and the smartest bishop was the guy. Like, so the
hierarchy.
intellect and like also the gnosis in the Catholic Church, which was prevalent. You can see it in the cathedrals. You can see it that they have this huge line. Well, during the Black Plague, everybody deserved religious rights, and so you have all these priests that died from exposure to the plague. So after that, they basically let anybody in. The clergy needed members. So every mouth-breathing knuckle dragger, wears the cloth, and it doesn't have the same like potency anymore because now it's just anybody. And then you have this massive corruption that rips through the church for centuries, So maybe the oligarchs are right. Maybe we should be treated poorly. I don't know.
Well, that goes into the kind of middle class, because we have the power structure we have right now, which definitely seems oligarchic in nature, and not just oligarchic of one country. It's oligarchic of many countries. Each country having their own oligarchs and them kind of coordinating, it seems. But then we have the middle class, and the middle class was so interesting because the middle class was something that had never existed before, created out of industrialization and other things, electricity. That electricity really helped the middle class. I'm down here in Argentina, which also had a middle class very similar to the United States, but they're also one of the closest to losing it because of messing with the type of things that the rest of the world is now messing with, but Argentina got started early. And so they're sort of at the tail end of a lot of mistakes in terms of political governance and economic governance. And so they're actually feels like they're out of the way. But as we're talking about oligarchs, it's like who knows what's really happening. But that middle class part is interesting because there's some theorists, particularly who have gotten more popular recently, start to talk about like feudalism and removing the republic and all these different things, and it's like that seems like a bad idea. It feels like the United States did a really good job in its constitution, like really figured it out, maybe in ways that Rome didn't figure out. But it's like this is our best shot, and now like it's enticing because as things get more chaotic, that means that going towards an authority always feels more appealing. But I don't think that's where we need to go. Who knows what's going to happen though? Any thoughts
I
there?
agree. I think there's more enlightened ways to do it, but humans love violence and we love worshiping things, especially the dear leader.
Yep, yep, yep.
We like
yep.
creating division and
Yeah.
taking heads,
Yeah.
but I agree. I mean, it's like it's so delicate. Like no democracy has ever lasted that long, you know? And
Interesting.
perhaps it is with the strength of a solid middle class where, there's upward mobility, not only economically, but you can also get your guy in every 4 years. If every 4 years you're pissed, we're like, our guy needs a chance. You're like, yeah, put him in. We'll see how it goes. And then somebody else has their guy and they're really passionate about it, It's just, it's a brilliant machine to like acknowledge and really respect human nature, which is so flawed, but it needs what it needs,
What's your take on the AGI and AI, where we're headed in terms of, is this like electricity where it's going to just support a middle class? But we were talking about earlier about how people are going to plug in, and I definitely agree that people are going to plug in and not plug out. I mean, we're already there in some sense, just with the scrolling and everything like that. What's your take on AGI and how that affects the economy?
I think it would be a radical transformation positively. I think we're going to get a 10x production boost from everything. We're going to have new work that people never even could comprehend. I work in podcasting, and if you would explain to me when I was 25 years old, dude, this is what your job is in the future, I'd be like, what? What is that? It wouldn't even made sense to me, in the same way that when I was growing up, I lived in South Denver, and Mr. Bridgewater, old man, lived across the alley, and he was long retired, and I was just a little kid, and he would tell me about when he was what do you call him, a farrier. So he put horseshoes on horses in downtown Denver. That was his job, and I was like, what? And so like, he probably lived long enough to see the first electric car, to like go through the entire combustion engine, be like, yeah, that's old. We got electric cars now. I mean, so we're going to see kind of an explosion of technology that the world's never seen. And it's like, it's here right now. I mean, it's just the robots are already here. I've got 3 electric cars, electric bike. It's incredible. So I think economically, there's going to be a little bit of turbulence as people kind of reorder, like, okay, how do I fit into this? And hopefully, again, hopefully that's like very liberating and cool, where the robots are going to do a lot of our work, honestly. So what will we be doing? I don't know, programming robots, maintaining robots until the robots do that. Oh, shoot, did I lose the volume on you?
Sorry, I had a cough, so I turned it off, and now I'm back on. But so Buenos Aires, I love being down in Buenos Aires because Argentina has a beautiful sort of approach. It's very Italian, like Renaissance. They love studying things. They love studying dance. They love studying music. They love studying all these different things. I go to cooking school down here, and the more I do of the hobbies, the more I improve in my hobbies that I have no professional benefit from outside of just random stuff. The more I'm excited for AGI because that means that so much of the mind-numbing knowledge work that we spend so much of our time doing, I find it valuable in the sense of having a goal, reaching the goal, and then being done with the goal, and then achieving things. Um, but I don't think we're going to have so big of a problem in terms of our losing a lot of our work. Do you personally think that you like say in 5 to 10 years, most of the work that you now do is done by robots? Will that be like what will you spend your time on?
I don't know, probably some other thing.
Mm,
It's just so hard to tell. Like you were talking about, like there's going to be like authenticity triggers.
mm,
Like if I
mm,
can, make my face beautiful on every single Zoom call, and do whatever, there's going to be a reverberation back from that. There's going to be a backlash from that.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, how is my job going to be replaced by AI? Probably, but that's why I think I pay close attention and kind of ride that wave, so that it's not breaking on me.
Mhm,
Um, but that's the wild thing, and I have a lot of conversations about AI and what the future looks like, especially with founders. I have a
mm,
podcast called AI for Founders,
mm,
and I asked them, like, what is keeping you up at night with AI? What are you excited about? How are you incorporating this into your business? How do you see this like strengthening your staff? How do you see this weakening your staff? And every single person has different answers.
mm,
Everybody knows what a game changer it is, and they're just slowly incrementally seeing how it can be valuable to them. But
mm,
nobody knows right now, which is also
mhm,
what makes it so exciting. And like you were talking about vibe coding, there's a great little vibe coding community. We get together every 2 weeks here in Denver. And same thing, you have designers, you have senior engineers, you have teenagers, you have hobbyists, you have entrepreneurs, you have all these people, and we're all just like, dude, what are you doing? Look at what I'm doing. And we're like sharing tips and
mm,
tactics because nobody
mm,
really knows what you can do with this stuff yet. But it's
mm.
so fun, you know?
And it feels like knowledge, we were talking earlier about the dark age and how they lose knowledge, and it feels like knowledge itself is this really finicky thing. So now we have artificial knowledge, and that artificial knowledge can burrow into anywhere we want to go. Usually it would 100 years ago it would take like a guy studying the library to for 20 years to answer a question that he has. Now we can have that question immediately, and we also build things with that artificial knowledge. But it feels like there's this great diagram of what a PhD does. I read it on Quora a long time ago, and it's like a circle, and it's like what you when you do your PhD, you're one little blip on that circle. And it just that's what it feels like is we're just going to explore all of these different ways around the circle to try to create new knowledge. And so, like, it might be that there will never be a time at which we can are like done finding use cases for AI. And this is where I think I disagree with a lot of the technologists. I think a lot of times they're kind of assuming that there's a limit to knowledge, but I think the knowledge itself might be limitless. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is limitless. I kind of try and always weigh out, you know, the microscope and the
Yeah,
telescope.
yeah, interesting.
So it's like the PhD is that microscope. Let's get real tight, which is really important. And then, but also being able to like look out, and look broadly. Be
Mm,
able to focus the light because. I'm just reminded of like that Bob Dylan song where he was talking about useless and pointless knowledge, and it
ooh,
always stuck with me because
ooh,
it's like,
interesting.
because I'm like useless and pointless knowledge. I'm like,
Yeah.
or you have the idea of like the Garden of Eden, where they ate
Uh,
from the tree of knowledge. There is also kind of like maybe they're just pointing to a danger of like how much information and knowledge do you need? Does it enrich you? Um, and I think that the answer is both. As somebody who likes knowledge and the pursuit of that, it's very interesting. But also like you know, does it make you happy? I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Very interesting. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Where do you think podcasting is going in terms of AI? Do you have any insights? And I can share a little bit more about how I kind of think about it with the vibe coding. All the tools that I've built so far are all related to transcriptions. Now I'm using Riverside, and Riverside actually creates transcriptions pretty easily. But I went and replaced Descript, and then I figured out how to build Q&A tool. So I figured out how to, because all of the nouns inside the transcription, the AI gets it wrong. And so my freelancer can go and use this tool to basically correct all of the nouns in the transcript. So like there's the AI generated content for podcasts. There's all these other things, but what's your kind of vision of the future about where podcasting is going?
Well, I think it'll get more and more popular. I think as things get more sanitized and M-dashed and straightened out by AI and perfected, I think there is a charming amateurishness about podcasting that I really appreciate and I think will become more and more valuable, of people kind of stammering through their thoughts and opinions, and like people being able to listen with 50% attention and be like, oh, wait, what did he say? That was cool. I think that becomes more valuable. I'm really excited for podcasters and creators because, like you said, Riverside is super sick. Podcast clips on TikTok and YouTube blow up all the time. So there's great channels to promote your podcast. There's great ways to create and chop up and edit your podcast. I think it has a really bright future.
I should get on TikTok. I still have not gotten onto the TikTok in strange anxiety over the CCP, but I should probably stop worrying about the CCP given all the talk we did about oligarchs and everything like that.
They already know everything.
Yeah. Wrong business for me to get into. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can our listeners find you?
Great. Best place probably with me is LinkedIn. You can find me, Ryan Estes, on LinkedIn. And I also have a podcast, aiforfounders.co, if you guys want to check that out.